Hey guys, Ken here from KCTG as well as Sebastian.
What's going on, guys? With the Shell Bastion.
Hey man, that's
You
what
know,
some people know you as.
hey, it's still random when people call me that. I'm like, I have it's a
Nah, nah,
name.
nah,
But
nah.
then
That
again,
that is your name.
okay, I'll take Shell Bastion. You guys call me Seb, Shell Bastion, whichever you want. I
Yeah,
don't
well,
care.
I call you Saz, dude. So hey guys, today we're actually gonna be talking about player skill. Now, I'll be honest, rough outline of player skill. Rule number one is don't confuse it with luck.
Yeah, that's a big one for sure. You got to make sure that you know what you're doing. It's not just, oh, it happened. Like, well, here we
Yeah.
go.
Number two is an actual good player can still understand that RNG is calculatable. Now, a few of you have mentioned in the comments of I think the video 2 weeks ago that RNG is still a thing even if you calculate. Yes, you're not wrong. However, at the same time, you can make yourself less less of a risk to RNG loss losing if you can actually take the time to understand where you are in the game state. So, Sebs, how about you tell people what a rough definition of game state is?
So to me, game state is being able to see how the pace of the match is going to go. If you start off strong or if you start off weak, you have to be able to identify that and see what you can do in order to progress your own game state and make sure that your plan goes according.
Now, let's say that you have a idea, your game plan, right?
Hmm.
But let's say if through a reality check, so to speak, it fails. Is this still a good game state?
I mean, it can be and it can't be, especially if what you have, like say if you're playing, a one-shot deck or like if you're playing something that needs to really tempo out, if things aren't going according to your game state or your game plan, like how you have a flow chart to what your deck should do, if you see how your game state will progress and like what you can do to make sure that you're good, I mean, the game state will eventually pander out in your favor. But if you're say if you need a win early, like if you play something that just needs to win right off the bat and you're just not getting that, I mean, hey, that's a bad game state, bro. Like you might just have to take the L.
And let's be honest, right? So there's times that you can, I want to say, when you're playing this game, right, or any game you're playing, once you understand that, hey, I only win with this scenario. Like, there's times that you have to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak.
Yep.
But there are some people that understand this game state, right? You
Hmm.
can either understand that, hey, uh, if you're on the opposing side of this player, oh, he only wins if this scenario happens. What can I do to stop said scenario from happening?
Yeah.
And on the other flip side as well, if you are the player in the situation, you also need to understand this. For example, let's say Vanguard, right? Uh, the luck factor of the game is hitting triggers. Well, if the only way is if your opponent two to passes or one to passes and you need to hit that trigger on top, well, understand this and play for it. Don't just say, "Oh, fuck, I lost because I couldn't."
Yeah. And yeah, it sucks to be like, oh well, I mean, if you sit there and you try and think like, oh well, my game state is completely done for, like right at the beginning of the match, I mean, that's just being like over, like just super unconfident. I mean, you're just being
I mean, at
upset
that
at
point,
that
you're not
point, but
playing to win, you're just playing to survive to not lose.
exactly. But hey, sometimes playing to survive and not lose, sometimes it wins you the game. There's
It
been plenty
does.
of games in tournaments, or I've done it like, we've had some pretty big tournaments before. And I'd say, you know what? Screw it. I'm just not going to do anything for these next three, 4 turns, and I'll get the win. The player across from me might not like it, but I'll take the
I
win.
mean, but
You know?
realistically speaking, right? Let's say that that is your win con, that like
Hmm.
playing to live turns into playing to win.
Yeah.
Like the other flip side is, right? Let's say that once again, let's take Vanguard because it's the biggest RNG game out there currently, outside of the opening RNG hand.
Right.
Um, if your opponent uh doesn't know that if you literally just need to abide out 3 turns, 4 turns, and then you win because of it, it's no longer this man is stalling the game. He's not progressing game state. That's incorrect. He's just building up his time, stalling out his own end that gives him his win condition.
Right.
The versus part is, let's say your opponent is swinging into you, you only have enough to guard one last attack, but there's 2 attacks coming. Well, guess what? You either throw everything away from one attack and risk it for the next one, or you be a smart player. Take the first attack coming in, because if you survive, one, you have the benefit of the trigger you got that lets you live. You need to guard less, meaning less cards in hand, which also means, sorry, more cards in hand, which also means that your next turn you have a playable turn, not just, oh, I threw everything away to live and now I have nothing to do. You might as well just say you lost anyways.
Yeah,
like
no, that's true, dude.
like realistically speaking, some players need to understand this. Sometimes you're in a losing situation. The only way you win is to luck sack your way out. And yes, we say luck sack a lot, but there's also a calculation for, oh, I haven't seen so many cards or so many triggers out, so many cards. Hypothetically, realistically, I should be able to get these cards. Realism, hitting 2 out of maybe 3 back to back, maybe not the easiest way to do it, but being able to calculate, oh, I have a fighting chance that I'll survive, do it.
Yeah, no, definitely. Especially like when we take Vanguard as the example, right?
Mhm.
We know that luck factors into it in your game state. If you've already decked enough in Vanguard, you should theoretically hit triggers. You
Yeah,
should technically be okay. In other games, I mean, if you set up your deck in a certain way, like say for Magic, if you're scrying, constantly and you're making sure that whatever you need is the next card, or if it's not the next card, you're able to just mess with it.
you
There's
shove it
certain
back to
things
the
that we can
bottom.
do. Yeah, shove it back to the bottom and go from there and figure something else out
Yeah, like this
instead of
isn't this doesn't only apply to like even just Magic. Like Weiss does it, Yu-Gi-Oh does
yeah,
it,
yep,
where players are able to manipulate their deck. No, we're not talking about stacking here either. We're talking about legit deck thinning. You're legit just cycling through what you need and don't need to get to your cards.
exactly.
There's a reason why, for example, let's say Yu-Gi-Oh, right? Upstart Goblin is a really good card because it turns your deck into a 37 card deck running 3 copies.
Yep,
And running less copies of a card means, or sorry, running more copies of said card means you're gonna cycle more, which means you're going through your deck more. Even though you're not hard plussing your hand, you're still going through your deck, which
exactly.
you need to understand. Like that's sometimes what people need. There's a
And
reason
you know
why,
that,
like, yeah, you should, as a player, as both players, you should know this. Like
yeah.
Weiss, which unironically is sometimes more RNG than Vanguard. Funny enough.
Yeah, I've heard some funny stories of people taking like, I'm
Pockets
gonna
of
hit you for,
damage.
X amount of damage, and then they just go and heal it all the way. I'm like, oh
Yeah.
well, that
Like
sucks.
sometimes you cancel, sometimes you don't. And
Yeah,
in Weiss, like funny enough, is even though it's one of the biggest RNG stack factors, like if you're unfortunately hitting that pocket of damage that makes you lose, it's also the biggest skill game where you need to understand all 50 cards in you and your opponent's deck. And
yeah,
that's actually a skill. That's not just, oh, this guy has a good memory. I mean,
yeah,
ironically enough, memory is also considered a skill because you can be like, oh, you have this, meaning I should play around it.
yeah,
Or I saw this come out of your deck, meaning you can't get it back yet. How do I make the most out of this right now? And this applies to any game at this moment. If you see a card, like, and this is like skill too. You see a card that screws over your game plan. All right, he runs it. How many copies does he
mm,
run? Is this the only one he
mm,
runs? Like, how do I play around this?
right,
And people need to understand that just because your opponent is, let's say, any game, to be honest, or yeah, any game, is playing the meta, playing your answer, playing the counter, it doesn't necessarily mean you lost. It just means
no,
that you need to fight harder. You need to play
yeah,
better than you normally would to get the dub.
yeah, definitely. And like, tying that back into game state, if you realize that the deck that you're playing against is a lot more meta than you, or like, technically has a better win rate than you do, or whatever your deck is playing, whatever deck you're playing, you should realistically know how that matchup would go. If you're picking the deck that isn't, the top tier deck, like for us, like I'm gonna pick a top tier deck no matter what. I'm gonna pick something that, for one, I enjoy, but if it's top tier and it wins, I'll play that. I don't have a problem with that. I know a lot of people don't like that, and if you're one of those players that doesn't enjoy that, then I would suggest that you learn every point of that game that you could possibly get into and just know how to play through it. And that'll just push your game state, that'll push your skill as a player, that'll help you just improve overall and give you better general knowledge for the game.
And yeah, like this is the big thing too. Is just a lot of players that, and I'm sorry if you feel attacked, players that are listening to this. Sometimes it is your own fault that you are losing because you don't want to acknowledge that you don't understand games, that you don't want to acknowledge your opponent's win con. You would just
Yeah.
think that what you're doing is better than the other player, therefore you should win. Like, there's always, always, always a player that's going to be better than you. That's rule number one. No,
Hmm.
no one is going to be number one in this game. There's always someone better. This is a hard rule that will be a thing. Let's be real, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, Number two, because there's always someone better than you. You should never ever take a game lightly. Versus, like, no matter who you're playing against, what you're playing against. So,
No, I mean, like, being able to focus on the game and make sure that you do well. I mean, that's gonna help. So,
so number three is honestly, all right. Number three is just if you find yourself in a scenario where you are losing the supposed matchup you're supposed to win, right? Like the 9 out of 10 matchups you're supposed to win, and you're losing this,
hmm.
is it because of luck? If you want to say it's luck, I will highly doubt it and just say you died to a better player. But let's say in the small probability chances that it's a luck factor, right?
Yeah.
Then see if they're willing to play you again and run it back again.
Oh yeah.
Because if it was luck, right, you should be winning again. But if it's not, guess what? You found the better player.
Exactly.
And if you found a better player, you should probably understand why you lost. And this ties back to everything we said before. Just because you lost doesn't mean that you should just walk away from it. You should embrace the fact that you lost, number one, and then learn from it. Don't just be like, oh, screw this, I lost, I'm never gonna see you again. Chances are,
Yeah.
buddy, you are.
Exactly, yeah. Especially if you want to get better and you're going to be more in the competitive scene, you're going to see the players that, for one, beat you, and for two, want to win. So they'll know how to get their advantage and push their game state.
And that's the thing, right? Like, there's gonna be players, especially like, funny enough, I want to say, uh, I don't know if you watched the newest episode of Vanguard, but
Oh, the
fun,
the most recent one, right?
yeah, funny enough, I was actually watching it just the other day, and
Right.
the character said something that actually resonated a bit. You're
Oh,
either
okay.
someone that is at the top of the league, you're a professional player, and you're recognized as a professional player, or you are recognized as someone that plays in the shadows, that doesn't, strive for recognition. You play in your own group, you play like locals, but realistically, you're a good player. You're just not professionally known. You're not, globally known.
Right.
And when a professional player runs into one of these, I want to call them shadow players, right?
Mm.
What ends up happening? Does the professional player keep his title, or does he get bodied by the shadow player who knows something else that the professional player doesn't?
Yeah.
Like that's the same as playing like a meta deck versus the rogue deck. You're playing
Yeah.
meta, you should know what's happening and you're doing good. But the moment you get bodied, is that because you're not a good player? Is that because the other player is better? Like there's so many things that are there that people need to understand.
Yeah. It's a lot of like push, and also too, like how you mentioned it. if you are a player that doesn't strive for having that recognition, I mean, that's still fine. You can still learn to play well, especially if your idea of playing well is playing to win. Like, I mean, like me and Ken, we have that idea where it's like if we're gonna play, we're gonna want to win. We're gonna want to do well.
Mhm.
And for some people, I mean,
I
that
mean,
might
some
not
people they see us as
necessarily.
try hard and sweaty.
Yeah, I mean that's fine though. Like I don't mind that at all. I'd rather them look at me that way and then still lose to me than be like, "Oh, I don't think Sebastian's really trying." Because like to me also like, I'm going to use the Smash scene as like an
Reference.
example really quick for this. Yeah. There's a lot of good players that will use they won't use their like main character, right? So what
Hmm.
they do instead is they just use like a whatever character, somebody that they know they can beat you with, but they know that you're not gonna like they're not even gonna bring out their actual character to beat you, you know?
Correct.
And they just know the game so well that no matter how optimally you think you're playing, you're still getting bodied by a low tier, which is,
And funny enough, right? It's not even that they are not respecting you. It's
mm,
more the lines of when you're a I want to say a good player, right? When you can officially give yourself that label of a good player, you're
right,
gonna not want to use your main deck. You're not gonna want to use your main period. You want to just have fun. You want to, expand your horizon, so to speak, by playing other things.
right, right.
And only time that this doesn't happen, right, is if the good player is actually wanting to be sweaty or try hard. Like that's the only time you'll ever see a player playing what they're known for.
Yeah,
Like other than that, it's not that they're disrespecting you. It's more like they want to have fun while trying to win.
right, right.
So some people that I honestly haven't seen it before, but I have seen people call me out for switching decks.
Mm,
I just want to have fun, dude. I don't want to just play the same deck over and over again. Yeah, I made it. Yeah, it's pretty and fun, but it's not that it's what I want to do. It's just I need to spice up my experience. Otherwise, I'm gonna be, exhausted
yeah,
from this game. I don't want to just keep going.
yeah. It feels stale like that too if you
Correct.
just keep
Yeah,
playing the
that's the good word. Like it
yeah.
turns the game stale, and like a lot of players that want to, you know, say other things just to make themselves feel better at this point or give themselves a reason why they would lose, right? Like, bro, I don't care whether or not my deck answers yours because I swapped to it. It just means that I want to have fun. Coincidentally, it beats you. Or
Right.
who knows, maybe I beat you, not the deck.
Right, right. I get you.
Like,
That's true.
in Smash, in fighting games, you'll see this a lot. Like, there are characters with bad matchups. And oh well, coincidentally, I just want to play said player
Yeah.
or said character. It doesn't
Yeah.
mean that I want to just beat you to the ground because this character counters yours. It just means that sucks to suck. It just happened to fall that way.
Yeah. It's true. I mean, yeah, if you get bodied, I mean, you get bodied, you know?
Yeah, like what separates though the good player versus the I want to say the scrub at this point is the good player will acknowledge, hey, I lost. Why'd I lose? Once again, like everything we're saying here just recircles back to what we said before. When you lose, understand why you lost. If you're
Yeah.
gonna be salty about it, you walk away, right? Like
Pretty much.
there is no oh like there's no time when you lose that there is no reason why you lost. Like there's no just I just lost because I lost.
Mm.
Like I find it very very hard to believe that there's gonna be any scenario where you lose because you lost. There's no I lost because he's a better player. I lost because I drew bad. I lost because I bricked. Like there's no time that happens.
Right.
There's always a reason you lost.
Yeah.
Like
And
no.
it sucks to be like the players that are gonna sit there and, tell themselves like, no, no matter what I did, I lost. Like the only time I would ever say that is like if I drove check and I had nothing left in my hand and I drove check all three grade threes or something,
Mhm.
or like two grade threes. Obviously, I'm not gonna have anything to do,
Yeah,
and at that point, I lost. But
correct.
if you're not in that position, I mean, you should at least have planned. what could happen that turn after that you try and go in for a kill. And if you know that like there's nothing you could have done or you could have prepared for, then hey, you sit there and say, okay, look, I gotta go for the Hail Mary, and if I don't make it, then GG. You know, you just you know that you've lost, and you can accept it. You don't have to
Correct.
sit there and be salty or mad about it. And
Correct,
oh,
because
but if I would
I'll
have had
tell you
this, I
this
would
right
have
now,
won.
right? Like, if you lost on that scenario, right? Let's say that, oh, he lost because of bad drive checks. Well, leading up to that point, what happened? Like, did, like, let's use you for example, right? Did
Yeah.
Sebs play the best of his ability up to this point, and his opponent just outlasted him? Well, at that point, it's not Sebs that did a misplay. His opponent was just the better player at that point. His
Yep.
opponent understood how to outlast Sebs and beat him.
Yep.
So Sebs lost because his opponent was better,
Yeah,
and that's
and
the
that
thing.
happens.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and that's the same with, let's say, me, right? Like, there's times where I have lost to Sebs, and Sebs has lost to me. We've
Yeah.
both stared at the game, going, okay, what could have been done differently, and we go from there.
Hmm.
But we understand that, hey, it's not like RNG beat us. Like, yeah, there's times that we completely sacked each other out because of triple crit, right? Like, we've all been there.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
But at the same
that
time,
happens.
these moments are so far and few in between that if I'm gonna give it a percentage of how many of our games come to this outcome, I
Yeah.
want to say it's 1%.
Yeah, especially like for somebody like us, where we know we're pretty evenly matched when it comes to games,
Hmm.
and we can understand like, hey, these next couple games that we're going to be going through, uh, regardless of the deck we're going to play, we know what each deck does. We know how to counter whatever said deck. We know what points the deck wants to explode or push, and we also know when to slow the game down to benefit us.
Correct. Like, I honestly want to say, like, the only time that either one of us fall into this pitfall of, oh, we messed up, is this player that we're playing against has run this unknown tech that we don't know about
Yeah.
and just catches us off guard. And because of that, we lose. So at that point, kudos. We lose because you ran a better card than we did.
Yeah. There's the thing. I mean, it's just stuff that you don't imagine a plan for, especially when people are throwing in random things into their deck. I mean, it's like Yu-Gi-Oh. It's like when you have random rogue decks that are popping up in your meta. The good thing about Yu-Gi-Oh is that you have a side deck, so you can be, quote unquote, a better player and figure out, okay, my opponent is playing this. Let me just go ahead and beat them. Oh,
All
I
right,
have the
and
perfect.
let me cut you off real fast. We do
Uh,
have a surprise guest today. His name is Dio, and Dio is a player of I want to say I think he's Strictly Broken.
Yes, I am on Strictly Broken.
So hey Dio. Also, for those that have maybe met Dio before, he was also part of Team Vision, which was a big Vanguard community back in the day.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. Like pre-COVID, right? Yeah.
yeah.
So, Dio, I believe you have met Sebastian before. He was also part of Team Vision.
What's going on, Dio?
How's it been, man? Been a while.
Yeah, been a
So,
while, huh?
actually, today, the topic is that we are talking about player skill and how, one, it's how it's defined, two, how people can improve on it, and three, how people can recognize it and differentiate it from luck.
Sure. I
So,
definitely have a lot of thoughts on it. I know people have been talking about it a lot lately.
So let me ask you this, Dio. Like, so we're not gonna tell you what we've talked about. I just want to know what your understanding of player skill is. Like
Sure.
in your own definition, in your own words, what is considered player skill versus luck?
Sure. Okay. So in that context, the biggest thing to me is consistency of performance. So like people can always top one or win one event, right?
Hmm.
But there are certain players that we all know of that have topped most, if not all, the events they've attended or consistently win or do well. That's like a very easy visible metric. Another one when it comes to like playtest groups or like at the local level is seeing how competent people can get or the level of understanding they have with like limited time, right? Just familiarity with the game. Because like there's this idea among a lot of the people that compete or the people that I personally test with that if you do a minimum of 20 hours of playtesting before an event, you'll perform at like 80% of your level, right? Like you would do reasonably well across the event. But obviously, like the more hours you put in, the more like percentage points you get, so you do better.
Hmm.
But for me, that's it, right? Like consistency of tops, like how like relevant are you as far as like, okay, this person's at this event, I should be wary of them like post round 6.
Mm.
So yes, that is one metric, like the ability to be a top, right? Like to always win, always top eight, always, their name is always there.
Yeah,
Now, what about understanding the flow of games? Not even just like we know that
yeah,
they should know this, right? But like, because then there's times that the player wins via luck. Like I know some people admit that, oh, I hit this so and so trigger, or this thing miraculously happened, so I won. So
sure.
differentiating that like that luck factor of winning said game versus winning via game state.
Sure. Okay. So I'm gonna give a luck example and then like a game state like knowledge example.
Mhm.
So I'm obviously new to standard. I haven't competed in the format yet, although I think it's really interesting. I would say that anyone playing Dark States hitting over trigger offensively on your first swing, pretty luck sucky, right? You get
Oh
the
yeah.
permanent 10k in
Yeah.
crit for the rest of the game, and it's like known to be really good. Like other over trigger scenarios you play for, right? Like you like I think the key to over trigger specifically is something you can play towards because
Yeah.
you have multiple drive checks, restanding, etc. That is something you can actively try to push for. That's more of like okay, a little more nuanced. A good example would be game flow, right? If you guys remember the format in Kara Expo, like before COVID, we had Crow on no seal, which was like a not well represented deck at the time.
Mm. Yeah, I
Um,
remember.
Yeah. So basically, I actually did not know how to play against the deck. Thankfully, I got to see some playtesting between Crow and Stallworth right before. So I theory crafted how I'd play into that matchup. And basically, my theory was I have to overcommit early to put him at a lot of damage, which obviously no seal can mess with CB, but that
Right.
puts me in a state where if I go force two, I can, push on to get like a kill turn right earlier. Whereas like we don't let the game last as long, which is like to their advantage. This obviously goes to other card game states, right? Like I know people right now are like not happy with like breakboard Yu-Gi-Oh or like how slow Magic Grandy can be.
Mhm.
But like understanding that you always have a game plan, whether or not you're the beatdown, like obviously shows like you know what's happening.
Hmm.
Correct. Now, we were talking just before you joined that there's going to be times when the player needs to understand that if they do not understand game state, you're going to lose, like, for 100% of the time, most likely. And when you are in a losing position, right? And you're in a spot where you need to lose right now, or you need to take a hit right now to try to live, or throw everything away and then, suffer because you lived.
Yeah,
Like,
okay. So this I call this fishing for triggers. So if you can see the game state, like a good example right now in the current scene, and I know like I'm using Vanguard as an example because I'm only competing it at the moment, is against Grand Blue. This happens a lot where you know you're gonna face off against like 2 or 3 Skull Dragon attacks in a turn. Understanding that you're gonna hit 6 damage and whether or not you take it early to fish for the heal or not is huge, right? Because you
Yeah.
only have so many PGs or Sentinels that you can use. Um, I feel like a lot of players play with luck as a bonus. They don't play with
I
the
don't even want to
situation
say
in
it a
mind.
bonus. I want to call it an excuse.
No, yeah, but I mean they like I if you guys remember, Vision had this thing where we all had to choose like quotes, and
Correct.
mine as a joke was just use like qualia, right? And the reason why, because I felt like a lot of players didn't play with damage in mind to the point where a lot of my early wins had to deal with I would guard early and like murder my own hand against Excel decks, knowing that on their kill turns I could fish for 3 damage to try to hit those 2 defensives, right?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Like that's a very easy one. Another one would be like understanding when to CB deny. Like I think a lot of players still struggle with that. Like a very common thing is to put someone at 4 damage, set up crit only attacks, and always ask the question, do you hit the heal? Right?
Yeah.
And because people are scared of being in that situation, they'll overcommit guard. Maybe they live their turn, sure, but now they have no CB, no resource, and you easily live their turn and you win anyway. Um,
Yeah.
like these are like really common scenarios that happen, and I feel like if you can't read the board state, like you won't get there. But I will say it's definitely possible to get there. Like Texas just happened like pretty
I mean,
recently.
yeah, a lot. Like if you are committed enough, I'll say this: a lot of people can grind down any opponent as long as you're able to, keep it up. Even if you don't understand what game state is.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, like kind of something similar to that. Like the other day, last week at my locals, I had to play against somebody that was playing Prison, and I'm playing Baramagnus, Dark States. So what it came down to was he saw that he's like, oh, I have my one CB that I used. I wasn't able to hit my 15, right? And we got stuck in a stalemate where he didn't want to attack me and give me CB, but he also wanted to try and deck me out at that point. So it was like a really long, grindy game where, in my mind, I'm like, all right, well, we're gonna do this. I have to do this to win anyway. Like came down to the wire. I had like maybe 4 or 5 cards left in deck, and he just tries to rip a card off the top and gives me a countercharging girl, the grade 2. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh well, looks like I won. Like, sorry, dude. Like, yeah, it's
yeah,
just weird. Like being able to get to that point as in Vanguard, right? We know that we can fish for triggers like how you mentioned, but also fish for the items that we really need. And some players don't take that into account. Some players will think, "Oh, but I didn't see this card. Did you try and see that card? Were you working
not
to
even
try
to
and
see
get
the
to that card?"
card, can you see the outcome?
Exactly.
Like, there's gonna be times, right? Because then I play one of the most uncommon decks, and a lot of the people that have watched this channel or visited this channel has already been subjected to what deck I play, which is Zorga.
Mhm.
Now,
Mhm.
if you don't understand what my deck does, you can always feel free to ask what's public knowledge, right? And if you want to say like, oh, you're playing a deck that is irrelevant, it's not meta, you're rogue, I'm gonna win this game, right? Well, chances are because uh, I'm pretty sure I can label myself as a better player than you.
Yeah.
Like, I'm gonna beat you, and I'm gonna make you a very, very bad, player at that point. Like, I'll put you in a position where you lose, and I'll make sure that as the game goes, you know it.
Yeah.
And because I am like able to understand games, I'm able to understand how to win con, right? I'm able to say, hey, well, this is how I'm gonna win. Whether or not you want me to get there is your choice. But because I'm able to do it myself, and I put myself in a better game state, a deck state, everything, I'm just gonna win regardless, whether or not you want to stop me.
So
And
what I think it's really interesting. Like both decks you guys just mentioned are like on opposite ends of the spectrum, right?
correct.
So like
Mhm. Yeah,
I
exactly.
also main Barrow as my primary standard deck, and
Got
like
you.
when you're describing the situation to me, obviously I've been in the same scenario. In my mind, I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, so our goal is to fish for a counter charger, right? We know this. No matter what
Counter
they do
Charger and the
pre-draw,
grade 2 that puts cards back.
everything back. Yeah, so we have
Yeah,
two
yeah,
targets.
literally, literally.
I'm greedy and run only one of the cards that put cards back. So if you kill
Yo,
it,
can I
You're
it's done.
damage it
scaring
and just
me.
make you suffer?
Exactly. Yeah, exactly.
Scaring me. I can't do
But
that.
so what's funny is when they didn't know about that card or weren't playing around it, that shows lack of just deck knowledge, right? Since Sparrow is such a
Yeah.
high represented deck, they should know that you run 4 copies. Like it's a guaranteed soul charge by itself, right?
Hmm.
So there's no reason you don't run four. So if they were not accurately like accounting for that,
Hmm.
that's also a misplay on their part, right? But to Ken's point, like I've been studying a lot more Zorg, obviously, just because of my own interest, because the deck is very like interesting to see, and obviously he's the only one putting out content, so I've seen all of his Zorg specific videos, and we've like discussed like, oh, why does he play Highlander orders versus like I personally play four of the drive check one, right? And this is like a theological question, right? Do you like one game plan or do you like having like a toolbox, right?
Mm.
What's funny is though, because Zorg isn't well presented, unless you take the time to get those percentage points, or you're lucky enough to have a good player on a not well represented deck in your area, you not having that knowledge puts you behind, right? And that takes me back to like a Yu-Gi-Oh thing that we say a lot at the 51 locals where like all the jobbers play, where if you pick up a card, you're probably losing, right? Because if you don't know what the card does by seeing it, you're already behind.
Hey, that's fair. That's really good,
That is
actually.
very fair and funny
Yeah.
enough, right? Like, and we're just gonna throw us back into Vanguard, Weiss, Magic real fast. Like in Magic, a lot of players should understand what links to each other, like what threats can be played from just one card being dropped. But like I want to say even more so in Vanguard and Weiss, where these card games, if you don't understand anything and you just let your opponent play, well, I guess you lose, because at the end of the
Yeah.
day, your opponent is gonna bust out a combo and you'll be like, oh, so that's what it does.
Yeah.
Cool.
I didn't know you could do that. It's like, oh well, you should have known. Sorry.
And funny enough, right? I'm not condoning gambling, of course,
Mhm.
but I have a feeling that a lot of players, because a lot of the tournaments that at least Bushiroad represents are free, so to them, win or lose, they don't care. But if let's say we threw them money on the line, right? Either an entrance fee or something, right?
Mhm.
Players would magically just care like 20,000 times more.
No, I agree with that for sure. I mean,
Yeah.
I think Bushi tournaments are the only ones with like the highest dropout rate because people just enter for promos as well. Like you don't even have to pay for the
Yeah.
promo, right? There's no harm not signing up for the promo than leaving. Like I've had people show up for a Vanguard event day one, weren't playing day two, so they just signed up for the Weiss event to get a promo.
Yeah, and that's just a big thing about player skill there too. Like players that don't believe in themselves, don't think that this game is worth playing because they keep losing and they don't want to they don't want to improve on themselves, giving multiple reasons why, like i.e., oh, my opponents always are lucky, I'm always so unlucky. Well, and this goes back to I guess the conversation that me and Sebs had, and I think I talked to you about it too, Dio. Players that always say that they're unlucky, they always brick, right? I'm sorry. You want to compare standard to V and G, where we had to build our deck from ground up, where player skill started when we picked up a deck idea and said, "I want to make this deck."
Okay, so we were talking about this recently, and it's really funny because like all of this is like obviously we've just been competing in the teams format, and it's been my first time competing in like teams as opposed to singles.
Mhm.
Um, and I actually have not competed in standard, although it's my primary format here at locals. Like right now, I am very consciously debating the whole idea of like the 10 minimum. The idea that like if you're not playing Luard specifically, right, you want to play
Oh,
at
like
least
if you're not
10.
playing the top 10 decks?
No. The grade count, right? So
Oh,
like you
yeah,
know
yeah,
how
yeah, yeah,
Luard plays
Oh,
like
okay.
9 or 8 grade 2s and
yeah.
like DP does as well.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
play these decks and like the minimum you want to run is 10, right? Like for like
A lot of
calculator
decks,
math, a
yeah.
lot of decks want to
Yeah.
play at
Yeah.
least 10 and 10, right? Ideally, you play 11 and 12 to hit your ride. But I'm at this point where I'm like, man, I really just want to run 10 and 10 of like the worst grade of my deck and then just max out on like, oh, if grade ones are the best card, grade ones, if grade twos are, or grade threes, right?
Mhm.
But like what I've noticed, at least in my testing with Overlord this last season, is like since the deck does the same thing, if I just run the most friendly ratios, like the whole like 12, 12, 8, I just
Mhm.
do better. And it's like
Right.
it's unfortunate because you want to like build for these techie situations and scenarios, but like if you just play good Vanguard, good basics, hit magic numbers, the game will reward you. So
But
like you
here's
have to
here's
decide like
where we're trying to get to though. Like, I guess the basis of all these podcasts I'm trying to do, right? Like, what gives you that opportunity to become a good Vanguard player? Because, or just a good player in general for any game at that matter. Because, like, I don't know if you've seen or listened to the past weeks, but we
mhm,
talked about like how to be a good, prepare for tournament for one, right?
mhm,
How to build or play a good deck. And then I believe last week we talked about net decking. Like we went from tournament prep to meta calls to net decking.
mhm.
Like all three things that a lot of competitive players admit to doing.
Yes,
But
I definitely do all three of those.
but here's the thing, right? Like compare yourself to a tryhard that never makes it to top eight.
I can think of a few, sure.
What is the difference between you and them, though?
I guess there's like a whole bunch, and I'll try to like dial it down. So the first one is one playing the game as much as I do, as much as people do. I think all of us don't just play Vanguard. Like we've mentioned Yu-Gi-Oh, Magic, Weiss, etc. I've been playing competitive TCGs since I was 9 years old. I'm 27 for reference.
Damn.
So like this concept of this concept of 10,000 hours, I've spent that much time in a local scene, like in
Right.
a tournament setting.
Yeah.
So like when it comes to like being stressed at an event, I notice, like at least in this team season, that I've always felt way more calm, right? Like I've never felt stressed. So that's the first part. The
All
second part
right.
is how
So
do we
so one attribute of you is that you don't take it to heart. Like a lot of your plays is just like, okay, this is happening.
No, yeah, and the thing is, like, it's part of the game, right? Like, you have to respond to the scenario. Like, you will G assist, that's part of the game. Like, assuming you're not playing standard.
Mhm.
Um, you will like reach in scenarios where like you're forced on a miracle heal, your opponent double healed on 6. Like, these are parts of the game. And like, what's funny is though, you can play around them. Like, one of the biggest things people forget, like in premium, is when you're playing against like Neos, where like you know how they have the reset, like if they take the
Mhm.
6 damage, they shuffle.
Mhm.
If you set up a crit play and they reset, they still have to take another damage.
Mhm.
So you can
Yeah.
play through the reset. Like people forget that these are actual game states that happen, that really do happen. Like that happens in top all the time. Um, but I think how you prep for like net decking, right? I think identifying resources is a big one. Obviously, Vision used to provide really good resources. At the moment, myself, I look to Ken, like I message him. I talk to Astral Susano, if you guys know Mo. WCC puts out great lists. Strictly Broken, whenever we top, they post a list. Like, and Paradox posts all the topping lists. So like one, there's a really easy way to find good lists, right? But then, as all good players here know, net decking isn't the only thing you do. You tune, right?
But here's the
Because
problem,
this,
right? A lot of players will not admit to knowing this or not admit that they don't know it, but still call themselves a good player, but they still net deck.
I
Even
mean,
even that, like, or I feel like maybe some players where they see like, oh, they're these top tier people that are winning their events, right?
mm,
Maybe like some players do it where they look at it and they're like, I don't want to play that. It's like, why wouldn't you want to play that? Like, if you want to win, I mean, this is a deck that
so
wins. Like,
uh,
you still have to try and learn it at least, you know?
Mhm.
yeah, I think the knowledge aspect I 100% agree with. I will say that like you do not have to play the best deck to win, although it
Yeah,
helps, right?
yeah.
Like I think
Correct.
great examples of that would be, so I'm going to use two. So Mo, so shout out to Mo, Astral Susano. He
Mm.
wins with his deck no matter what the format is. He he is a very skilled player, really technical deck builder, and he tries, right?
Mhm.
So like if you are one of those players that say don't want to play the best deck, you have no excuse not to top. Mo top the entire season, right? That's the first thing I'm gonna say. The second thing I'm gonna say is you don't have to play the best deck, but competitive decks also help. When I
Mm-hmm.
won with Katrina and when I topped with Narukami, they were both third best deck in format.
Mm-hmm.
So I made my logic for Katrina because it was free. The deck had no resources, no outplay. It could search PGs. Like the deck literally had everything. So there was no
Yeah.
reason for me not to play it. But my Narukami logic was I personally did not enjoy playing Murakumo. I didn't enjoy playing it into the meta. I didn't enjoy playing the mirror match. And it was one of those decks where I thought I would love it, right? Multi-attacking, big numbers, defensive capabilities. It had everything. But for whatever reason, I didn't enjoy it. So I was like, how do I play into this meta? My only options at the time were DP, which people didn't realize was sleeper deck. Like the Dyliner play was really good.
That was nuts.
Or what I went with was Narukami. And my logic had to deal with my counterblast knowledge, right? You put your opponent at like 2 to 3 CB, and then you ask the question every turn. You run like 8 to 10 crits. Are you willing to take this damage? Because if
Yeah.
not, I am not giving you CB.
Yeah.
And can you kill me with 1 CB? Probably not, because at that point I was running what 6 draw triggers, all the grade twos that let me draw a card. Like I made my deck trying to beat just Murakumo because I believed that naturally I could play through all of the rogue matchups. Like I think I
Yes.
played Beast DDs that day. I played against Aquaforce. Like I remember thinking,
Nice.
I'm only scared of Murakumo, and I played 7. And the only player that beat me that was on Murakumo was Andy, who's also on Strictly, and he beat me in Swiss and Top. So like the logic worked. Like I don't feel bad about it.
Right.
But yeah, these players, like, you can do whatever you want, but there's still a minimum amount of effort that's required, right? And unfortunately, if you choose not to play best deck or top deck, you have more effort to put in, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so here's a question I have then, right? Like,
Okay.
uh, and this is for the benefit of a lot of players that are listening right now.
Sure.
So when you're in a scenario, let's say that you are picking up a deck that's supposed to be good, right? You net decked it, and let's say you listen to what we said too, like you are understanding everything, you know why cards are run, and you're going through everything, all the motions, but you're still losing. Now, for a player that, like you, right, that has so many hours, I'm not saying that we don't either, right, Sebs?
Oh my
But,
god.
but
The
just
amount of
saying,
testing
like,
I've done by myself is insane.
bro, like, let's just say that uh, we gone through all the motions, we're playing, we're testing, we're still losing though. Um, and we ask ourselves why. And some players will just give up, right? Well, now I'm talking to the players that are thinking about giving up a deck or thinking about giving up because they don't know how to get better. What words do you have for them, Dio? Like they already have the best deck, they just don't know how they're losing.
Sure. No, I definitely have a lot. And then for this reason, actually, I'll send this link to both Ming and Ricky, who are on my team in Texas. Both of these players I met in the shop challenge scene, like back before COVID happened, and both like cool guys, like competitive, but didn't get their tops, right? So they both told me they wanted to get a top, like they wanted to, and I said, okay, let's go to a tournament together. So for a couple of months we played. Now, this is what you should do. You need to one get over yourself and
Yeah.
find someone better than you because there is. Like, I can reach out to Nikki, who I think is better than me. I can reach out to players that have consistently topped higher than me and have won bigger events, and I can still get better, which is what I'm still doing. Like, I am joining teams, I'm having these discussions because I want to get better as a player. I'm not anywhere close to where I want to be in this game. So if I, who have topped multiple times, are doing this, so can you. Now, if you're in an area where you can't find these players locally, there's huge amounts of Discord communities that do this, right? Strictly Broken, WCC, KCTCG, Vision, we all have open Discords. So you can join, ask questions, and get feedback. So we are all really open resources. And I've only experienced super friendliness from the community to the point where right now, even when theory testing decks that are nowhere near the public eye, I get to message Crow, Mo, WCC players, Strictly Broken about all my ideas and get honest feedback and have people actually trying these decks with me. People that are not on my team, people have no reason to help me. And that's just because we want to see the community grow and get better, right? So first off, find someone better than you to help you because it'll be a good metric, right? Like if you're only playing with people that you beat at the local level and then you go to a regional and get clapped, it's because you're not playing better people, right? Like you need to like increase your range. Outside of that though, there's like always something you can't see. And a big thing to do, and this is something I had like my teammates do with me, is when you play a game, discuss what's happening. Like you don't always have to play open-handed, but you can be like, hey, why don't you call another grade 2? Because like if they swing and they do a 50k guard and some no pass, and you run 12 crit, you can put the crit on the rear guard, and then either commits another card or forces the 2 damage, right? I think early game aggression is undervalued, especially in standard at the moment, which is obviously
Oh,
something
yeah.
that Ken talks about a lot when it comes to why he wins with Zorg, and it's actually how I'm building my current standard decks. I think that grade 1s and grade 2s are not played on a high enough count, and it really hurts because I like Bastion, right? So trying to like understand that that's a huge factor of the game is hard for players, right? Like, oh, but this deck is amazing. There's all these great threes and it does like a lot of attacks. I'm like, yeah, but they're either at 1 or 2 damage, which means they're gonna have another turn after your grade 3 turn. So your grade 3 turn isn't a kill turn. Like these are like knowledge points that you won't realize until you've been playing the game longer, right? So that's a big part. Find someone better than you, learn, listen, have open discussions, and then honestly just like be ready to accept that you're probably making way more mistakes than you like know. Like a big one is magic numbers. Like most people don't have them memorized, like a lot of the top players. Understanding what thresholds creates more cards in hand, and understanding how when you split card damages, if there's a known PG in hand, you're probably splitting inoptimally, right?
Now,
Because you're like, oh, I'm hitting a magic number, but they're already going to PG this column, right? So you might as well put it somewhere else.
so here's the another question then, like, right? So let's say
Yeah.
that the person is in denial. They don't want to admit that they need to get better, or they don't. Uh, let's say they don't know where to find a better player, right? They don't want to admit, oh, they're a better player than me. They just only win by lugging. Like, let's say this person is so stuck on wanting to just in the shadows get better.
Sure. I guess like I don't think they'll get better if they can't admit it to themselves. Honestly, like, I'm sorry. Like I said, I do know some players like this who just will say that I'm lucky, that my friends are lucky, that every top player happens to be lucky, and I'm like, wow, if we're all this lucky, we all should just be rich, right? Like we just start playing the lottery.
Exactly, for
Um,
real.
But if they really want to get better on their own with no help, then take invisible help, right? Like, honestly, there are so many video resources that teach you things. People are still writing articles. I have been like writing some on my own, like for my friend group that I might post soon about like how to play overlords effectively, because I think like the resources are outdated. Um, Obviously, Ken's been posting up so many gameplays of Zorg, so you can just watch that and see what I'm talking about when it comes to early game aggression. Like these are all small things that you can do without having to admit that you're bad to get better. I do know that there's also like MetaFi coaching happening, and apparently there's been good results from the players currently doing it, and I don't know all of them. I know that Derek Dow from WCC is doing MetaFi, and if I wasn't already competing, I would pay for that. I think that he's an amazing player, and like what I'm saying would help. And you don't have to post that he helped you, but you'll know when you top that he did.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, he's
shout out to
definitely a great
Derek.
player.
But no, like honestly, like Solom has been putting out videos forever. It helps. Ken is literally shining light on a deck that people like as a fan favorite, but like is not being represented in the top community. Like if you're someone that says, "Hey, I don't like meta decks," go follow Astro Sano and just see like witches actually work. Look at how he made Poets now a meta deck when people said it wasn't. Like there are so many online resources that you don't have to admit you're bad that you can actually study. And you were saying, oh, I look at top deck lists because we're subscribed to WCC and we see every single top list that comes across like globally. Cool, but you don't get to see the gameplay, right? There's another step you can take to study more, right? Net decking isn't the last step of the formula, and also keep in mind that these net decks are for their own meta, right? So a good example would be, if you look at the Asian meta, right? We don't see any Overlord. It's very underrepresented, right? Which means that if you were playing Order Colony, you weren't probably running the Brilliant Blister that stops freestanding Vanguards, which is why I got to perform really well because most people are running this stuff to hate on NMD, right? Like that's a very like meta knowledge thing. But at my local meta, people play at least 2 or 3 of the Brilliant Blisters because they're aware of me as a player, and that like so your performance at a local level might be stunted, right? If you're not someone that's like really well like perceived as far as the meta goes, you don't have to worry about this problem. But if you're starting to like compete, that's when the idea of like, oh, hiding deck list, hiding spice comes into play. But even then, if you have anything that's remotely good and you share it with one person, the entire community knows about it. Like going into worlds, like the last worlds that was held, everybody knew about like the grade 2 gold spice, right? Like that wasn't a secret. And that was the spiciest thing to come out of it.
Yeah.
So shout out to WCCs for that spice. Um, but yeah, like if you're really that scared to ask for help, then get better at Googling because like all the resources are there.
Yeah.
So it does seem like that is going to be all the time we have for today, guys. So I hope that those listening did get a good glimpse, at least of what it takes to be a good player, what it takes to understand being a good player. And if you're not there at that level yet, if you're willing to learn, then like Theo gave you so many resources to go to, as well as even himself admitting like, oh, even a player of his caliber reaches out to help to get ask for help. Like, don't be ashamed to ask for help. That's rule number one, I guess.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
the thing is that once you are on this track, you're probably gonna be a better player, and you at top tables at that point.
Yeah, and
So
these players are friendly. So like I met Ken at top tables, and now we're talking all the time.
hey man, I was the one standing above your shoulder watching you. I'm not. Don't worry though, I'll be sitting across from you now.
If I play standard.
Don't worry, I'll play the formats just for you, man.
Okay.
So that's rule number one. Number two, guys, like I really don't want to call people out for this, but get your head out of there. Like understand that there's gonna be better players and acknowledge it, get better. So I do believe that this is going to be a good time for us to crack down next week on how to beat RNG. Are you ready for that,
That's gonna
Sebs?
be fun. Jesus Christ.
Yo,
It's
it is the
just
best.
yeah. Beating RNG is the main one. I say I'm gonna agree 100% with you, Dio, on this one. You really just have to like let your ego get out of the way,
Mhm.
because if you don't let that get out of the way, you're not going anywhere.
Oh
Even
yeah.
if you lose to RNG, if you lose to a better player, everything is just going to be such a burden on your shoulders because you're going to think, oh, why didn't I do this? Because I'm this much better than everybody else.
Yeah, and then
Like,
once that burden's on you, right, and it weighs down enough that you just quit the game, welp.
yeah, you just feel
Yeah.
feels bad, man.
So thank you, Dio, for joining us, and Sebs, pleasure to always have you. So
Well,
stay
thank
tuned next
you.
week for our take on how to be RNG, guys.
Good
Thank
luck,
you.
guys.
Later.